The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Friday Night Live with me, Hafiz Sha'ban, on another Friday evening, another edition of Friday Night Live on the 31st of January 2020. Corresponding to the 29th of Jamad al-Thani, right at the end of Jamad al-Thani, 1441, we find ourselves. As usual, we are broadcasting live on Luton Inspire FM 105.1 FM, and also broadcasting live across our sister stations nationally, Sheffield Link FM. Assalamu alaikum to the people of Sheffield, Peterborough, Salam, Derby, Nottingham, and many of the other great places where people are tuning in to us via the Inspire FM app, or of course tuning in to us via Facebook. Assalamu alaikum to all of you, our listeners, wherever you are listening from. Trying to get involved in today's discussion. 01582481822. Join today's discussion. 01582481822. I've got some fantastic topics lined up. I'm sure you're going to have a thought or an opinion on these subjects today. 07779481822. 07779481822 is the number for your social media messages. So either way, do participate, do get involved. We like an active listenership. We also appreciate our passive listenership, but let's show that we actually value our contribution. We value getting our voices heard across the national national media and national outlets. 01582481822. 07779481822. Inshallah ta'ala, of course, Jummah Mubarak to all of our listeners. Today, inshallah, we're going to be speaking to Islam 21C. So we've had Islam 21C on the radio on Friday Night Live several times before. I believe we're going to be speaking to MPAC also. I think it's a first for MPAC on Friday Night Live. We've got a correspondent from Middle East Eye. And we've got a couple of studio guests. We're going to have Dr. Tahir Mahmood, who's a local GP here, later discussing the all-important coronavirus update. And we're going to have some local climate environment activists also joining me here in the studio, right? A number of stories we're going to be covering this evening, inshallah. We're going to kick off with a very interesting conversation, interesting story. I don't know if this has caught your attention. If it has, let me know. If it hasn't, also, I want to hear your thoughts. Why are Muslim Imams and institutions, some Islamic institutions, normalizing relations, right, with pro-Zionists? Right? That's it. You hear me correctly. Some Muslim Imams, some Muslim institutions, masajids, seeking to normalize relations with pro-Zionist institutions. What's going on? Shouldn't they be doing that? Should they be doing that? We speak to the for and against proponents. We're going to be speaking to MPAC, who have been leading a campaign on this particular subject matter. We're also going to be covering, you may have seen in the news, Trump unveiling his Middle Eastern plan for Palestine. Is that a plan of the century, or is that a catastrophe, or is that is that a plan? That's the question I'm going to be asking. I'm going to be speaking to a correspondent from Middle East Eye. And then, of course, in the second hour of the show, we are going to be discussing the coronavirus, and we're going to be getting an update. We're going to be taking some questions from a GP, and also looking at wider implications around this virus. Of course, it has caused alarm bells, a lot of potential panic, a lot of questions in the minds of a lot of the people. So let's take some of those questions and let's see if we can answer some of those questions for you this evening. And last but not least, we're going to be discussing environment and climate change, right? And what does that mean for me and you? What does that mean for us as a community? What does that mean for me as a household? As a household, what can we do, right? What can we do to do our part within the climate and environment challenge that we are facing as a nation, as we are facing as a humanity, right? As human beings. So we're going to be discussing that in the last hour, and we've got a number of guests that are going to be coming in to discuss that with us in detail. So that's the lineup this evening. 01582481822. 07779481822 is the number here in the studio. Right, let's go straight to our lead story, or our first story that we're going to be covering this evening. And as I said earlier, this is with regards to some Muslim institutions, some Muslim Imams, that have been recently caught out to be getting very cozy and getting into bed with pro-Israel, pro-Zionist kind of organizations, right? And that definitely raises some eyebrows, right? It definitely raises some questions. What's going on? And you'll be actually quite alarmed to understand that it was actually the London Central Mosque in this particular case, Regent's Park Mosque, well-known masajid, and also a well-known Imam, Qari Asim, okay, Hafiz Asim from Leeds, Leeds, one of the Leeds masjids, who were due to participate in an event, was sitting on the panel was going to be, of course, the board of deputies of British Jews, who is a very pro-Israel, pro-Zionist organization, institution. Now, the subject matter of discussion was going to be the plight of the Uyghur Muslims. Now, it sounds very interesting. It sounds, what's wrong with that? They're discussing the oppression of the Muslims in Uyghur, right? In the Uyghur Muslims in China. So you would think that's something which is fine, but hang on. It is the pro-Israel board of deputies of British Jews sharing a platform with Regent's Park Masjid and Qari Asim. We've got on the phone Imran Shah, who is from the MPAC, spokesman for MPAC, who's going to hopefully shed some light on what's happening over here. Imran Shah, assalamu alaikum and welcome to Friday Night Live on Inspire FM.
Right,
Imran, can you shed some light on what's happening here? Muslim Imams, Muslim institutions trying to seek normalization of relationships with these pro-Zionist organizations. What's happening? What's wrong with that?
So in the last 12 months, we've done 2 campaigns on this issue. This one with the Board of Deputies and Qari Asim is the second one, and it's the most recent one. So with that, it was the Board of Deputies themselves organising an event. Again, like you said, about the genocide that's happening, the cleansing, and the re-education camps of Uyghur Muslims there in Xinjiang. Regent's Park Mosque was down to host it. They pulled out after a lot of public pressure, and now they said that we've actually pulled out because we've got lots of a very busy schedule. But the people that actually push for that are saying that actually no, they're just saying that to save face. But despite that, Qari Asim still was down to share a platform when it was rescheduled in the House of Commons. Now, our campaign is to ask why. Why, to bring that light of accountability on this issue, because for the vast majority of Muslims in the UK and indeed the world, liaising with those who actively support Israel and its occupation is a firm red line. And if we don't collectively say no publicly, then that line will continuously be crossed over and over, and it will become the new normal. And one of the key things I really want your listeners to understand is that when we talk about Zionism now, it's not just about the Palestinians anymore. Academics have long proven over the past 15 years that Islamophobia here in the West, including the UK, the biggest pushers are Zionists. And when you look at India, the rise of Hindu nationalism, not just in India but also here, Modi, BJP, they've had massive backing from Israel, especially on the escalation of Kashmir. So the issue of Zionism is not just a Palestinian-focused issue now. It's a direct problem for us here in the UK and around the world. And when we're talking about Imams here in the UK breaking bread with Zionists, that context cannot be ignored either.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So thanks for that, Imran. You set the scene well. I mean, it does seem quite alarming, isn't it? Because initially you might give these individuals or some of these institutions the benefit of doubt that people are coming together to discuss a common interest, a common cause, and that is the oppression of the Uyghur Muslims. But hang on, when I looked at this, for a moment, it's almost the oppressor telling another oppressor, "You're an oppressor."
Exactly. Like they would never
alarming.
do the same event for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. They would never do that. And so for them to champion another genocide of Muslims, that is tactical. They're doing that on purpose in order to essentially split the loyalty of different causes. So if we, the Muslims, and to be honest, we as Muslims here in the UK, we've got to take ownership of this. Like, we haven't quickly enough. And so if we, the Muslims, feel that they're getting more reception by Zionists, that falls upon us as well. That as a side point. But really what they're doing, they're taking advantage of that and be like, well, let's focus on this. It's in our allies' interest in the West to attack China. Fair enough. And let's use this as a means to be like, hey, we care about Muslims and Muslim issues, even though we support Israel. So work with us.
Right.
That's the soft power, the power play that they're trying to use.
It's a very cunning political game. I get that. But what's been the response from the likes of Qari Asim? I mean, I know Qari Asim personally. I've known him for, ever since he came from Pakistan. I'm originally from Leeds myself. Has there been a response from, Qari Asim in terms of why he feels it necessary to share a platform with an organization which is clearly pro-Israel and pro-Zionist?
So this is the thing, is that when we try to question Imams on this issue, and Gary Asim's not the first one, they generally try not to respond. So there hasn't been a direct answering as to why. And when we asked his masjid, Makki Masjid, as well as Minab, where he is a chairman of, they basically Makki Masjid put up a tweet saying that we support this Gary Asim in doing this, and Minab basically retweeted it.
Imran, I'm pretty convinced that if you spoke to them to see whether they're actually in favor of Trump's latest obnoxious Palestinian deal of the century proposal, they'll probably also support Trump too in his audacious proposal on so-called Palestinian deal of the century.
Well, this is something that we should ask the likes of Gary Asim to be like, are you using that relationship to say like this? Do you demand that are you demanding any action to be taken against condemning or against this deal directly? Like, you as Zionists, are you doing that? And if they're not using that relationship for that aim, then what we see then is just a one-way relationship in which they are being used as soft propaganda for Israel.
Absolutely, because I think let's be fair to Qari Asim, he's not here to defend himself, right? And I know you've reached out and they haven't been forthcoming in terms of giving a response to it. But there may be a counter argument that, look, we're using that platform to further a conversation on Israel's stance towards the Palestinians. Do you actually buy that at all?
I don't, because when we looked at the previous campaign, I'll tell you what happened with the previous campaign. You had Imam Musharraf Hussain from Karima Institute. You had
this is the visit to Israel, right?
Yeah, so these Imams visited Jerusalem in particular. So Imam Ghulam Rabbani, he's the founder of Faizan Islam. He's also spokesperson for Jamaat al-Sunnah. And Sheikh Mohammed Asra, who's an Imam from Bradford. So they went on a trip for Jerusalem, and they met individuals who they said at the time didn't know that they were Israeli lobbyists. So a very infamous organization called the AJC, American Jewish Congress.
I don't buy it for a moment.
Yeah, so I mean that's what they said initially. A few weeks later, a tweet came out by the Israeli embassy in the UK stated that their people escorted the Imams around Jerusalem. Now that's cast iron proof that they are being used by a state.
Absolutely.
The Israeli state in particular, for propaganda for the state.
Absolutely, I don't buy it at all. Ignorance is not an excuse here to being politically used, and that's my point here. It's very clear where potentially the pressure of normalization here is coming from, right? I mean, this is like a government-sponsored almost initiative. A lot of these are, right? So it's very clear what the government agenda is and where the pressure is coming from. I mean, do you agree, Imran?
Yeah, I mean, there's two key facts from this that I found particularly interesting. One of the Imams started to doubt the effectiveness of BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Now, we know BDS is effective because it worked in South Africa. The idea is to make the occupation not profitable. Like, you can spin bad politics, but when the economics is bad, you can't spin that at all. That has real impacts on the ground. And that's why the Israeli lobby is trying so hard to ban it in the UK, in the US, and across Europe. It's actually in the Tory manifesto in the recent election to ban it in the UK. So the Imam gave no reason as to why he doubted it, but this is something that...
Which Imam was this supporting the campaign against BDS?
So he hasn't supported the campaign against BDS. He just said he had doubts as to whether it was effective. Right. Sheikh Mohammed Asra. The second fact is that he was a replacement for another Imam to go on that trip, and that Imam was Imam Qari Asim. So you have there's something much more deeper here than just simply random sort of trips. This is a consistent.
Imran, very quickly, we're unfortunately running out of time. What about the private one-to-one nasiha? Some of my listeners might be listening to us, right? And they may be thinking, look, well, what's all this expose? What's this discussing this in the public domain? What about the one-to-one private nasiha? Have you gone down that route to give this nasiha to these individuals?
So we only go down the public route when we know other people have talked to them privately.
Right.
And we know that's the case when it came to these Imams and also when it came to Qari Asim. So with the trip in Jerusalem, that happened already, so the damage has been done. So for us to assert that red line publicly, we had to essentially make it public. And for Qari Asim, there's been many people around him saying that this is not good. And the thing is that the public accountability is critical here, because what we have here is a religious leadership that is so used to doing whatever they want, whenever they want to do it. And so when it comes to public accountability, they treat it with contempt. They don't even deal with it. And this is maddening, because we live in a society where public bodies, public representatives are held to account as a normal, if not encouraged. If something is wrong with your NHS or your local council, you'll be emboldened to be like, no, I need to at least speak out. Yet when it comes to our religious leadership, we kind of give them a special status. And what that does, to really bring it home, it creates a culture where these Imams are more answerable to Zionists than they are to us. And is that what we want? We want Imams to be of that shape and of that ilk? Of course not. So things have to change.
Right. Last quick question, Imran. Is it political naivety on behalf of whether it's the Regent's Park Masjid, the London Central Masjid, or Qari Asim? Is it political naivety? Do you think that they fail to realize that they've been political pawns and being used, or is there ulterior motives there? Is it well paid? Is it government affording them certain I don't know, status and certain I don't know, benefits? Where's the pressure of normalization coming from, do you think?
I do think that some of these Imams are naive. They rightly have a sort of focus on trying to bring communities together, and I think that is leveraged. I don't know to how deep, where they actually are collaborating and using it for their own self-interest. When it comes to Regent's Park Mosque, which is interesting, because a lot of their funding comes from Saudi, and we also know that Saudi has been pushing very hard to normalize relationships with Israel. So there's that element of it, but there's also the element of from Hamza Yusuf and UAE and MBZ, and there has been meetings between Qari Asim and the quote-unquote Sufis. Some people call them Sufis, some people will not. And there has been those conversations there. So there is this network of, we need to normalize this geopolitical network of, we need to normalize relationships with Israel, and that's impacting our communities here.
Okay, Imran Shah from MPAC, spokesman for MPAC, thank you very much for joining us this evening and shedding light on this particular issue. Thank you very much, Imran.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, listeners, that was Imran Shah, spokesman for MPAC, and that's a very interesting conversation that I was having with Imran. I want to thank some of my listeners who have got in touch. We've got I don't know the name of this brother, but Assalamu alaikum, brother. Amazing show as always. Jazakallah khair. Great topic. It is so sad that many of our so-called scholars have become sellouts in essence. Of course they would, because we are no longer an ummah. Alright, so that's interesting. So-called scholars. and the opinion that this brother is sharing, which is that, we're becoming, some of these scholars are becoming, or are very politically naive, to put it best, right? I want to get your thoughts on this. 015824818220779481822. We are going to move on to our next topic immediately, because we're already running out of time, and that is Trump unveils his Middle Eastern plan amid Palestinian rejections. And that's an incredible story. Some of you may have followed that story this week, right? I mean, I've got Chloe Benoist, news editor and writer for the Middle East Eye, that I'm going to be speaking to, who's, the organization who have deconstructed the 181-page plan to give us some kind of a sense of what the proposals are. But of course, the Palestinian leaders have already rejected it, and it's quite obnoxious and very, very outrageous, almost preposterous for Trump's so-called deal of the century, and whether it actually lends itself any credibility at all. Let's go straight to Chloe. Chloe, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us on Friday Night Live.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. Chloe, I mean, you've looked at this so-called deal of the century, and you've analysed 181 pages, as of a lot of the other political commentators out there. What do you make of this? Is this any so-called realistic plan which is going to be worthy of consideration by the Palestinians?
I mean, no.
Right.
So basically, the Trump administration has been touting this as a peace plan for 3 years. But I think no kind of honest observer can actually call it a peace plan. What it is essentially is an Israeli wish list, and a call for capitulation for Palestinians. It's worth pointing out that Palestinian leadership has refused to cooperate with the Trump administration on this plan for years. Pretty much since they've seen that the Trump administration has a strongly supports kind of right-wing Israeli figures like Prime Minister Netanyahu. And indeed, the plan very much comes off as taking off the checklist of everything Netanyahu and other right-wing figures want.
Exactly. So, I mean, my next question to you, Chloe, is, I mean, what allows Trump to be so audacious? I mean, it's quite incredible in terms of just, in essence, pulling out the Israeli checklist and saying, here it is to the Palestinians. This is what you need to accept, and this is the so-called peace deal. I mean, that's very obnoxious or very audacious of Trump to be, to do that.
Well, I think in order to understand the plan, I think you need to perhaps look a bit more at Trump's domestic considerations. He's certainly kind of made a name for himself and gotten a lot of support in the United States from certain swaths of population, including especially his evangelist base, who are very strongly pro-Israel. And it's also worth remembering that a lot of Trump's political entourage is also very pro-Israel, very pro-settlement. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is the one who's come up with the plan, and he's well known for his support of settlement. We should also remember that this week Trump is been going through an impeachment trial. And Netanyahu, who's currently under investigation and is being charged with corruption, is also looking at elections in March. So the timing of the release of the full plan this week certainly isn't a coincidence.
Exactly. That was going to be my next question. You've already answered it, which is domestic politics versus actually any genuine attempt to actually address the Palestinian-Israel issue. I mean, it seems like the whole political stunt around the launch of this so-called deal of the century is all about the domestic politics as opposed to anything else. Absolutely.
That's true. But I think in some way we can see some kind of positive aspects to this plan being released. Obviously, it's very appalling, and I hope a lot of people who are reading it are being a bit shocked by it. But instead of kind of seeing it as a catastrophe that's happening in the future, it's worth kind of putting it in perspective. For this plan to be fully implemented, it would need Palestinian consent, which it won't get. But then it's also worth reminding people that a lot of what is in this plan has already been implemented on the ground for years.
Yeah.
What the essence of the plan is basically consolidating the occupation, which has long been kind of portrayed as a temporary situation that's lasted for half a century. So the positive side of this is that now we have a very clear view of what is the dream solution for Israel. And obviously that solution flies in the face of international law.
Yeah.
I think what this also shows, I think, is hopefully that this will show that all this talk of two-state solutions that's been going on for a very long time, this is a two-state solution that's being proposed now, and Palestinians for years have been talking about how creeping annexation and settlement building and kind of military Israeli control has made a two-state solution possible. So.
Chloe, unfortunately, we've run out of time. But thank you very much for joining us this evening on Friday Night Live. Thank you very much for your analysis and comments. Thank you very much. That was Chloe Benoist from the Middle East Eye discussing Trump's unveiling of the Middle Eastern plan. We're going to go into a commercial break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz. Listen to Inspire FM shows in your time by heading over to inspirefm.org or listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Friday Night Live with me, Hafiz Sha'ban, on Luton Inspire FM 105.1 FM. We're back for the second half an hour of the show, and we are discussing a number of key issues, key stories we're going to be covering this evening. First half an hour, we in fact covered two stories. We were discussing why some Muslim Imams and institutions are normalising relations with pro-Zionists. So that was a very interesting topic we were discussing with MPAC. And then, of course, we were discussing Trump unveiling his latest audacious Middle East plan, which has been described by Chloe from the Middle East Eye as an Israeli checklist, right? Checklist, or a wish list, rather. I think she said wish list is the word that she used. So a very audacious, obnoxious, proposal by Trump. Of course, more for domestic political consumption, as is also domestic political consumption in Israel for Netanyahu. Both leaders, of course, facing pressures at the moment, and therefore a bit of a diversion tactics, according to a lot of the political commentators and analysts. But I don't know if you followed it and what your thoughts are. I want to hear your thoughts. 01582 481 822 0779 481 822 is the number here in the studio. We are moving on. We're going to be moving on to our next story, which has been making headlines across the world, and of course is nothing other than the coronavirus epidemic that is currently taking the world by storm, and of course emanating from China. I'm sure there's a lot of panic, a lot of questions that people have in their minds, a lot of conversations that are happening. Earlier there was a conversation I was having with sitting in the coffee shop here in Luton. I don't think it was funny, but there has been a photoshopped version of a news alert going around, which is apparently purporting a case in Luton, which of course there isn't a case in Luton, and I don't think that's funny, and I don't think that is something that we should be taking so lightly, especially such a serious issue. But anyway, there are a lot of questions out there. 2 UK cases have been confirmed. The WHO have declared the outbreak a global emergency on Thursday. Flights to and China suspended. A flight carrying 83 Britons and 27 foreign nationals from Wuhan in China has landed in the UK. 213 deaths so far, and the list goes on. So a lot of questions in the minds of a lot of our listeners. So we've got a number of experts that we've got today in the next half an hour. We're going to be discussing with them. We're going to hopefully try to shed a bit of a light around it in terms of from a medical perspective, also from a perspective of the disease and the origins of the disease, potential origins of the disease. We're going to try to get a live update from China itself. We've got a correspondent, Yasser Masood, who's a senior international relations analyst who's actually based in Beijing, and we'll try to speak to him to find out firsthand primary update in terms of what is happening on the ground. But here in the studio I've got let me welcome Dr. Tahir Mahmood Saab. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much
for joining us this evening. And of course you've brought a fantastic guest along with yourself, Mr. Mark White.
Evening, salam alaikum.
Evening, wa salam, and welcome to Friday Night Live, Mark. First time for you here in the studios.
Indeed, yes, yeah.
All right, so let's go straight to firstly Dr. Tahir whilst we wait for our other guest to come online with us, Dr. Tahir Saab. So a lot of questions, a lot of concern in the minds of a lot of listeners. What's happening? What is the probability? What are the chances of that? Of course, coming here into mainland UK, 2 cases already confirmed. Cause for panic and alarm, or should we be a bit more cautious?
Thank you very much for selecting this topic. I think that was the very timely topic, and is going to spread a message across the Luton community minimum, because I think people listening to outside Luton as well, the anxiety out there is understandable, and the amount of epidemic has spread it already and caused casualties all over the world is huge, and I don't think that we need to undermine the people's anxiety. But having said that, UK has got a very good record of tackling these kind of epidemics very, very effectively. Take the example of SARS few years ago. We have got very good infrastructures, NHS available, guidelines and pathways that have already been established in the community, and people like in the primary care, secondary care, they know what they have to do when they have to come across any kind of overwhelming illness in the community. Having said that, however, there is no report of any person infected with coronavirus in the Luton or Bedfordshire area.
Correct.
There are a couple of cases, 2 cases have been announced in the UK today.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Dr. Tahir Saab. And just generally, so that's good. There's only 2 cases, and the UK authorities, of course, even the chief medical officer earlier and the NHS have given very clear statements that they're ready and able to, of course, address any particular issue. In terms of anyone who thinks that they've got some of the likely kind of let's say what's the word, thoughts or feelings, what do they need to do if they feel that they've got
if someone has come across someone with the symptoms, like any connection with Wuhan or any connection with someone who has been infected with it. So best thing is to do not do anything. Do not go to the hospital or the surgery or outside. Stay at home, make contact, and you will be tackled very effectively, because doctors are not supposed to examine you when you are suspected.
My point is, it could be genuinely confused, right? Someone's just got, feeling a fever, feeling a bit, let's say, got, temperature or some of the other kind of symptoms that may be very common, right? So they shouldn't.
This coronavirus is not different. The symptoms are not different from the any cold and virus, flu-like symptoms. But if someone has got connection or travel to that place, then they need to be very, very careful.
Yeah, of course. Okay, fine. All right. So we've also got Dr. Salman Butt on the phone. Of course, Salman studied biochemistry at Imperial College London, followed by a PhD in chemical biology. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Salman, and welcome to Friday Night Live.
Walaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
Jazakallah khair for joining us. So we've got Dr. Tahir Mahmood in the studio here. You probably have just heard some of the conversations that we've had with Dr. Tahir, and that's more from a medical perspective in terms of the panic and I'm sure the questions that are in the minds of a lot of our listeners. There's another perspective that I want to take from this, and that is, to what extent are many of these recent viruses or kind of illnesses that we're seeing man-made? Previously, what I mean by that that is previously we've had the mad cow disease, and that was attributed towards some of the practices of individuals trying to cut corner and putting profit before health. We've looked at the human lifestyles and how they have become very, very rampant recently, in terms of the type of lifestyles that we're choosing to live, that leading to certain kind of transmitted diseases, etc., etc. To what extent are these viruses man-made, Dr. Salman?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of misinformation online and stuff about, the origins of these viruses and so forth. I mean, viruses have been around for millions of years. They mutate regularly, and even coronavirus is something, not rare for us in the UK. It's just this strain. Yeah. That we're not our bodies aren't used to fighting off that as easily as normal. But it's important not to panic or anything. I had on this week's Psalm 21 Unscripted podcast, we had Dr. Imams Qureshi, who's a consultant in infection, clinical microbiologist, and he was trying to calm down the situation as well. That there's nothing to worry about or anything. There's viruses, they've been around for the different types have been around for many years, but they just naturally mutate as everything does, really.
So here so here the Dr. Salman, the question here is that there's you've probably read yourself apparently some reports suggesting its root cause was some of the wild animal markets, right? Which China is very infamous for, right? And specifically bad snakes being traded, consumed, and a lot of people pointing fingers towards that kind of practice, right? I mean, and some of these viruses are the ones that are quite primarily prevalent within animals and then being transmitted onto humans. Can you shed a bit of light on that for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say with any certainty with regards to this outbreak in particular, but it's well known that obviously you are what you eat. So if we're not careful with our, how we raise our animals, how we slaughter them, how we cook them and look after them and so forth, then there's always that threat, of poor hygiene standards and that kind of stuff, affecting us, impacting us. When it comes to this one, though, there's a lot of kind of theories floating around online, and researchers are working on this to identify, and their primary concern is just to try and make some kind of a vaccine for it or something.
Right.
It's hard, and it's not very useful to speculate anyway, because we have to be a bit sensitive as well as to some things are just different cultures do things differently.
Right.
So I mean, people here, where our parents are from, they regard eating pigs, for example, as something so disgusting.
Exactly.
But it's normal in this society here. So likewise, we regard eating snakes and the like quite disgusting as well.
All right. So that's an interesting thought. We'll come back to you, Dr. Salman. Jazakallah for your patience, Dr. Salman. So you said you covered that earlier in your podcast. What was the other kind of perspectives that you were looking at this subject matter from?
Yeah, so there's also the just generally, we should be careful with our kind of personal hygiene and that kind of stuff. So, when coughing and sneezing, try and catch the germs, in a tissue or in a flexed elbow or something like that. So just being generally hygienic. When it comes to, airborne pathogens like coronavirus and influenza and so forth, it spreads very quickly. So we have to be very careful when it comes to our personal hygiene. If somebody does, and it's important not to panic as well, that it's not something your body can't fight. You will get some symptoms. But generally speaking, even this, it's people who have a generally a compromised immune system that are more likely to, get seriously harmed by the coronavirus and other viruses. Just like influenza, you have and people who are at-risk groups such as pregnant women, the elderly, the children, people with maybe kidney disease and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But if you're just generally otherwise healthy, then it's nothing to panic about anything.
Okay.
It will knock you out for a week or two, but just let the NHS know, call 111 and, they'll check for other different symptoms and stuff.
Okay, Dr. Salman was just making a valuable comment, and I just want to pick that up with Dr. Tahir, which is, Dr. Tahir Saab, just general advice to our listeners. I mean, coronavirus or not, right? Having flu, having fever, sneezing, personal hygiene. I mean, these are elementary kind of actions that we can take as individuals to make sure that we're a lot smarter and we're a lot wiser the way we actually deal with personal hygiene when we have a flu, when we're sneezing, and so on and so forth. Some general advice around that for our listenership on.
I think personal hygiene is the mainstay of this treatment, or you can say the prevention. Is very important.
What about face masks and
there's a big controversy here because the size of the coronavirus, some people say is very, very small, not to get, but latest guideline says that yes, if you use face mask, I had someone sent me the message today, use face mask, that will prevent you. But I had some conflicting information yesterday from WHO, but because the size of the mask is size of the coronavirus is too small to be barred by the but however, I think face mask is a kind of one of the protective measures you can use it. And also people, they can sneeze. If someone sneezes in front of you, there should be at least 2 to 3 meters distance, and if it stays in the metal, if it's in fabrics, it will take a few hours to come to you. But best thing is to wash. If you come across someone, you wash your hands and keep yourself isolated and do not panic, and just call 111 and authorities will come to you.
Right. We don't want to cause alarm and panic out there, but we've also got another guest. We've got Mark White in the studio. Mark, so you're I forgot what was your background.
Oh, so a paramedic.
Paramedic, of course, paramedic. Yeah. So I mean, you must have a lot of experience within your field. What's your general observations and advice to our listeners on this particular subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other two guests have sort of summed it up really, really well, actually. I mean, really, it's just not to panic, really, and just good personal hygiene, like the guys have already said, really, just catching the cold in the tissue and things, and, just keeping yourself hydrated and eating well, and, and just not panic. And if you have any symptoms or you've had any contact with anybody, just stay inside and let the authorities know, really.
Keeping health and healthy and fit. Dr. Salman, some wider implications. Of course, China's almost, it seems like it's on lockdown at the moment. Of course, the whole Wuhan province is obviously almost under complete restrictions in terms of people going in and coming out of there. What do you think are the potential implications on what's currently unfolding with regards to China?
I mean, there's been a lot of conspiracy theories flying around online, but I think I've heard experts praising the way the Chinese have been, responding to this, and despite how worried some people might feel, there's actually a remarkably low kind of death count compared to the number of people who've thought to suffer the actual kind of the infection. So it's not as deadly and potent as some of the, for example, influenza type viruses have been. So although it is racking up a death toll, I think up to 170 plus now. If you look at that against the number of people who've been infected in the order of hundreds of thousands, then thankfully it is quite a low mortality kind of strain. It's not as kind of harmful as some other strains that we have, and we get inoculated for all over the even close to home in the UK. So if you look at other things that we've been vaccinated against from childhood. That's those things are far more. If you look at measles, if you look at meningitis, and these types of things, and these are very dangerous and have a big impact on us. So we do have vaccinations, thankfully, for that. So that's one of the things that we were talking about in the podcast as well. That vaccination is something very important for generally to keep up immunity and be exposed to, not kind of wrapping up our kids, but let them be exposed to safe levels of pathogens and germs in the garden and whatnot, so they build up a robust immune system from a young age, inshallah.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, touching upon prevention, Dr. Tahir, right? I mean, of course, it's something. Disease and viruses and these things are not new. They existed at the time of the beginning of the history of Islam.
That's true.
We know in terms of epidemics. Umar ibn al-Khattab. We know the Prophet ﷺ, advised with regards to how you actually contain and prevent, right? And you don't go into an area which is known to have a famine or to have one of those types of illnesses. So how are you finding the attitudes within the Muslim communities in terms of prevention, in terms of vaccination? Are they positive? Are we active in that field, or is there still some room for improvement?
I think majority of the Muslims, they have got no problems with the vaccination. Right. They understand that's very, very important for themselves and for the community as well. However, there are a couple of percentage everywhere. Not only Muslim community, I'm pretty sure Mark is everywhere in other communities as well. People, they have their own mind. Some people, they say they have some kind of belief or link. They want to do it. But having said on the same note, we must give credit to China, the way they try to contain the virus and the people in the same area. And also, they're not helping themselves. They're also helping other countries. Like other people are sending them the swabs back to them, and they're helping them. And that's the kind of if you go to an Islamic way of controlling epidemics in Prophet ﷺ time, they used to do the same thing. They used to isolate and contain the whole the group of people who have got this kind of epidemic on the same area. So I think they are really good. I'm pretty sure that China has done it, and I'm pretty sure that our authorities in the UK, they are quite vigilant, and they're going to do the brisk and very effective work.
I mean, Dr. Samar, I can't help but coming back to a lot of these social media messages, and of course we know that China's been in the spotlight for a very long time, and in particularly for the way it's dealt with the Xinjiang Muslims, the concentration camps, and where these millions of Muslims have been ineffectively being almost imprisoned, and people have been making a lot of analogy between the way they're treated, right, those Muslims, now what suddenly has turned around and happened to them, and they've had to force things to do that. I mean the two things that perhaps are not to the naked eye linked, right? But is there some validity to those kind of analysis and comments? Do you think, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that the Chinese state and the authorities have a great deal of crimes to answer for in regards to our brothers and sisters in East Turkestan, which they took over and calling Xinjiang province, the Uyghur Muslims there. But it's important not to mix that up with, apportioning blame on just everyday Chinese citizens. The crimes of the state, just like our own governments in the Western world, that we as individual citizens shouldn't be blamed for, or held accountable necessarily for crimes of those in power. But nonetheless, I mean, we shouldn't specify that any calamity is specifically a punishment for anything else, as some people might be alluding to. Although there are, kind of divine laws in the Sunnah of Allah in creation that, if we as a species, for example, as human beings, if we don't look after our responsibilities when it comes to looking after each other, looking after the animals, looking after the environment, then there will be, punishment sent. The Prophet ﷺ said, that be careful that the punishments that are sent will not just affect the wrongdoers among you.
Yeah.
So we, as a species, we have a lot to, answer for. We're not doing that well when it comes to looking after the environment, when it comes to looking after the welfare of animals, for example. So we do seek Allah's protection and Allah's forgiveness for that. And maybe this is a reminder for us to take our stewardship of the earth. Because in the Islamic kind of metaphysic, the human being is the steward of God on earth.
Yeah.
We have to take this as a central kind of relationship that mediates how we act with vis-a-vis each other, the environment, animals, rather than a different kind of Western neoliberal notion of metaphysics of the human being kind of competing with everything else for scarce resources or conquering nature and that kind of stuff. So that kind of philosophy has to be pushed to the side now, and we need to go back to the roots of regarding ourselves as human beings as stewards of the earth, to look after the earth. It has rights over us. The animals have rights over us. And if we're not careful, as the Prophet ﷺ said, for example, if certain types of sins spread, such as fahisha, then likewise Allah will make cause to spread diseases that you've never seen before, right? So, but we don't say this particular virus is specifically a punishment for X, Y, Z. But generally speaking, we must take heed and remember the words of the Prophet ﷺ.
Yep. Okay, Dr. Salman, but thank you very much for your time this evening on Friday Night Live. Really appreciate it, but unfortunately we have now run out of time. Thank you very much. Dr. Tahir Sha'ban, very quickly, you got about 10 seconds, last few words before we finish on the story.
Yeah. Just wondering that if you come across with someone, just wash your hands, do goggles, stay at home and call 111 and the authorities will come to you.
Right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Tahir Mahmood Saab and Mr. Mark White. Last few quick words.
Yeah, exactly as my colleague has just said, really. Yeah, just try not to panic. I think there's a lot of panic for no reason, really.
It's well under control at this stage.
It's well under control, yeah. Just, keep yourself healthy, keep yourself well.
Fantastic.
And just don't spread the disease, really. And take care. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Mark.
No
Thank you very much for coming into the studio, Dr. Tahir and Mark White. Thank you very much. Okay, listeners, that was Mark White and Dr. Tahir. We are going to go into a commercial break. We'll be back. When we come back, we'll be discussing climate and environment. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz and you're listening to an Inspire FM podcast.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Friday Night Live with me, Hafiz Sha'ban, on this Friday, the 31st of January evening. It's now turned 7 p.m. First hour of the show has already transpired. We are into the next hour of the show, inshallah, and we're going to be covering a very, very interesting topic. I've got a studio full of guests, and we're also going to have some panelists on the phone, and we're going to be speaking to you. And we are going to be covering climate and environment, right? So it's a very interesting topic. Of course, first hour we've been covering a number of different topics, and the last one was the coronavirus, right? Update from Dr. Tahir Mahmood, Dr. Salman Butt, and we of course had Mark White here in the studio. So that was a very interesting topic. Hopefully that may have, or hopefully it did, allay some of your fears, answer some of your questions. If you've got anything in particular that may have cropped up in your mind whilst we were discussing that particular subject matter, then 01582 481 822 is the number here in the studio. 01582 481 822, 0779 481 822 is the number for your SMS WhatsApp messages, and you can SMS WhatsApp your questions to me, and I can of course get those referred to the experts and get an answer for you. Right, what else was I going to say? I was going to say something, but I forgot what it was. Right, so we're going to move on to the next story. We're going to move on to the next hour, and the next hour we're going to be discussing environment and climate. Right, so it's probably not as a familiar topic as cricket or football maybe for a lot of our listeners, right? But it is fast becoming a very important subject matter. And I tell you what, I've become a lot more conscious of it recently, right? Because you go into the supermarkets now, and then when you go into the supermarket and you want the carrier bags, and it's not free anymore, is it? So it means every time you forget your carrier bags, you have to pull out 10 pence, right, or 5 pence or whatever it is for a carrier bag. So that forces you to become a bit more cognizant of the climate and the environment. All right, so that was the first step. Then I started recently going into the Sainsbury's and to the other supermarkets, and then you suddenly see that even they used to give these plastic bags for you to put in your vegetables and your fruits. They've even disappeared now. Right, so you don't even get these small bags to actually put your vegetables and your fruits into it. So I thought, okay, well, what's this? This is all part of the environment and the climate, right? And then I used to go to the gym. I'm going to start boring my listeners, and then you used to get a dry bag where you after you've been for a swim and you dry your shorts and you can throw them into the dry bag. But they stopped doing those too because of the environment and the climate. I'm thinking, for God's sake, the climate, environment, we're getting everywhere. And Tom, before I introduce you to my listeners, we were here in the studio not too long ago discussing all about these weekly collection to fortnightly collection. And one of the arguments that the council was putting forward was about environment, was about recycling, was about climate change, etc., etc. So even if we are not paying attention to it, the fact is that the trends and the changes around us are all forcing us to start to recognize this issue of climate and environment change, right? So our attitudes are being questioned, our attitudes are being challenged, and we're being forced to ask a question in terms of our lifestyles, the way we run our households, the way we utilize some resources, the way we utilize energy, and so on and so forth. At least I am being as an individual, right? So that sets the scene. Hopefully, right, and I want to set the scene for our listeners. So I want to get my thoughts. I want to get the thoughts of my listeners. Have your attitudes changed in recent times, or are you the same kind of individual that you were many months ago? There's a lot of talk about climate change. There's a lot of talk about the environment. Has that really, triggered something on your conscience, on your mind? Yes or no? I want to hear your attitudes, whatever they are, whether they're pro or whether they're positive or negative. I want to hear your thoughts. Why are they positive or why are they negative? Right. On that note, let me now introduce to you my esteemed panelists and guests here in the studio, right? So let me go by, from the left to the right, or maybe I should go from the right to the left, actually, following the Islamic practice, right? So on mic 5, I have, right, Halima Ali.
Yep.
Right, so Assalamu alaikum, Halima. How are you? Okay, of course, youth worker and climate campaigner.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. And then on mic 4, I've got Zanera.
Assalamu alaikum.
Well, Assalam, welcome to Friday Night Live and welcome to the studio. And of course, on mic 3, I have got the one and only Tom Shaw, I believe.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, welcome. Councillor Tom Shaw here, Chair of the Cross-Party Climate Change Executive Advisory Board at the Council. That was a bit of a tongue twister. But welcome to all three of you here in the studio, right? So we've got 1 hour to discuss climate and environment, right? So I put the Council, kind of perspective on it, earlier in my introduction, which is, a number of initiatives that the Council has taken to force us to look at the way that we're disposing of waste, look at the way we're disposing of food, look at our attitudes, and to start making us a lot more conscientious, right? And of course that's been forced into practice because now you don't have the freedom of getting a weekly disposal, of your rubbish, but a fortnightly, and that's definitely driven a culture change, I would say, in a lot of households. What's been the feedback from yourself?
There's still some people that believe that the council made the wrong decision. Some councils in the country have gone to 3 weekly. Strange enough, it's the older people who believe the council made the wrong decision. The younger people, no matter which school you go into, no matter who you talk to, support it and understand it because they've been fetched up with recycling in the schools. But we've got no choice now. We've all got climate change is possibly the biggest challenge we face in this generation. If we don't do something now, it'll be too late. Some stuff is going to have to be done what people won't like. Yeah. There's some, but other stuff, if you follow what the young people have said from the Luton Young People's Council, they don't think we're going far enough or quick enough, which is, I can understand, but you can imagine, I won't say the names of some of the older people from, what come on this station, what we've had discussions with before. Yeah. But you try and tell them they're not going to be able to use a vehicle as much as they used to, or they've got to recycle more, and look at the fuss they made over the bins. Imagine what will come in a few weeks' time, or a few months' time, or a few years' time, when the whole way of life has got to change, basically.
Okay, all right, okay, fine. That's a good introduction, Tom. Okay, appreciate that. Let's get an introduction from Halima and Zunaira, right? So, those of you that are actually watching us live, right, and you're able to do that via Facebook, you will see I've got two, mashallah, young sisters here in the studio, right? Activists when it comes to climate and the environment, which is fantastic, right? I'm very keen to understand, what's driven that activism within the climate and environment. Is it, a genuine concern in terms of, okay, what's happening with the climate? The research that is showing, where we're heading as a human beings, where we're heading as a planet, right? It will be also interesting to hear from our listeners if you've become a lot more cognizant, a lot more conscious. 01582481822. Get in touch with us. Want to hear your stories. All right. So where should we start from? Shall we start from Halima? You're on my right, so I'm going to always start from you first. What's driven your activism within the climate and environment sphere?
So personally, so I'm a youth worker, and I would have called myself sort of like a political activist at first, but then I realised climate change is a very political issue. Right. When we look at the countries who are being targeted by climate change, they are essentially the poorer countries, what we deem as like the global south. Right. That's what you might have called sort of like the developing countries, sort of back in the day. But so when you think of it in that way, the countries who are richer, or the global north, are the ones who are essentially causing climate change. But it's the sort of poorer countries who are being affected by it the most. So for me, it was the human issue. I've been to talks where they've said, one of the biggest mistakes that environmentalists made was sticking a polar bear's image as kind of like the image of climate change, essentially, when it's actually a really human issue. And when we think of it in that respect, then people actually take more note of it. So if we look at little facts like, Pakistan had one of the highest recorded temperatures ever. And a lot of our listeners are, I know a lot of our listeners are Pakistani themselves. And to think about countries like that, where that's their homeland, it's being affected massively by climate change. We need to put it in that perspective. I'm also working for a youth leadership charity called Uprising.
Right. Just before we go on today, okay. Just the first point, because you've already covered a lot, right, in your comment. So Imran Khan has obviously referenced recently, about the climate change and the changes, the impacts on the glaciers and of course on the wider impact to Pakistan as a nation. And it's a very interesting point that you mentioned, which is government and corporate responsibility. Well, government responsibility, and it is the leading nations, the developed nations, that are the biggest culprits, right? Perpetrators behind climate, impact to the climate and the environment, and probably the least when it comes to taking responsibility. Right. And the victims are all the ones, the developing nations, and it seems that when the political conversations are going on, the book is or the focus on the developing nations to do something about it, as opposed to the leading nations like America, who's a flagrant almost violator of any protocol and any agreement that's ever been struck on the for the climate and for the environment.
Definitely. I would say in regards to that, even when you look at the people who are sort of shown as sort of like the climate activists or eco warriors or whatever you want to term them, you see people like Greta Thunberg, you see XR, for example, and essentially it's a very kind of white middle class look that they have, whereas the BME community isn't highlighted. We even had recently in the news, I think it was over the last week, there was a young black teenager. She was actually cropped out of a photo that was showing young environmental activist, and she was in that image, and she literally was just cropped out. So that is showing, there's like a media bias with this. I was actually asked once around, it was either the Muslim community or the Asian community, why people from that community, why my community essentially don't actually get jobs within the environmental sector. And I actually asked them, is it that they don't get jobs, or they just don't, is it that they don't get the jobs or don't apply for the jobs? What's the statistics? Are they actually applying and not getting it, or just not applying at all? And then this person was like, actually I don't know. And I said, you need to look at the sort of disproportionality of who's actually represented in all all kind of careers in the UK and America and so on.
Okay, we're gonna come on to some of the to Zanira just in a minute. But you were talking about political activism, right? So what does that involve from day to day in terms of for yourself when you say political activism? Or climate activism.
So like I said, I'm a youth worker, so my kind of day-to-day job is with like a youth leadership charity. My views here today aren't representative of the charity. They're not like a religious organisation. But Uprising they have like an environmental leadership sort of program.
So is the name of an organisation Uprising?
Yes, Uprising. So we run like a sort of program to have young people from the age of 18 to 25 develop their leadership skills, and we do like a social action campaign. And with that campaign, we've got a sort of environmental sustainability angle to the one that we're doing in Luton currently. So we were actually at Discover Islam Centre earlier this week, and you might have heard of their campaign around coats. So they've got a campaign where if you've got a coat, you can donate it, and if you're in need, you can sort of take one. And with that campaign, you look at it and you think it's a social campaign, but if you dig deeper, there's actually a sustainability angle to it, because you're not kind of you're recycling old clothes.
Fine. All right, I know Zanira has been listening quite patiently, and I want to come back to Tom because Tom's only here for half an hour, so I want to make most of Tom's time whilst he's here in the studio. Zanira, so you yourself are also a climate and environment an activist, right? Plus a youth worker. What drove you into this particular into this particular area of activism, right? And what does your work involve, right? So Halima was talking more about the global politics, right? What about for you as an individual?
So I actually agree with a lot of what Halima was saying. I kind of got involved through like a human charity international development angle, kind of looking at the human cost of climate change and environmental issues. Like, I think what we kind of forget is that humans are really vulnerable to changes in the environment. Like if there's a slight change, our food won't grow, for example. And in countries where your livelihood is from growing your own food and like feeding your families through that, it's actually really impactful when there's been drought and there's no rainfall. And a lot of these countries, like Halima said, are in the global south, what I would say our countries. So diaspora, I would say, like again, Pakistan was mentioned. I was born there. I have that connection, but I also know parts of Pakistan haven't had rainfall for like 8 years. So that's the very real effects of climate change. We talk about it in this country, and yes, we don't quite feel it yet, but actually what's happening on the front lines is what they say is like the people who are actually seeing the effects and feeling the effects of climate change. And usually they're not like the most they haven't contributed to like environmental degradation in the way sort of some of these more developed countries have. So for example, again, Pakistan, because you mentioned it, has only contributed to like 1% of carbon emissions globally, yet they are the 7th most vulnerable to climate change. And places like Bangladesh, for example, like really low lying, flooded most of the year now, maybe half the year is flooded because as sea levels rise, people on those islands can't actually survive. So it's all of these things, it's the connection to those places that make me sort of feel like kind of frustrated as well. So like Halima said, that the movement looks very white. We put different poster people on, like not saying anything about their intentions. I'm sure they've got great intentions, but actually even things like from our own community, being called an eco-warrior, like you asked me if you could call me that on the show. I feel like things like that actually put you in a box where people can't relate to you, because then you're seen as this hippie person. But actually, if you look down into the roots of it, it's a very Islamic issue. Things like waste and things like justice, all of that is disrupted when you look at how people are being affected, and people are already dying. People are already being leaving islands that they can't live on anymore because of climate change. Like it's basically change in the environment that so many people are vulnerable to, and they can't survive it.
All right, so we've got about 8 minutes left. I want to give that to Tom, and then I want to come back to you, sisters, in the second half an hour, because we've looked at the global context, and we've looked at what's happening at an international level. What are the impacts of that? Let's break that down into action, and what does that mean for us living in Luton, us as families, as individuals, and let's join the dots, to give them a full picture. All right, Tom, over to you. Thanks for being so patient and listening to the ladies.
I agree with everything they've said. We can't. My own personal belief is that foreign aid should be tied to climate change, and job employment.
Foreign aid?
Foreign aid.
Right.
Should be tied to climate change and jobs within the climate change industry.
Yeah.
I mean, we can assist. You've got some of the countries out, the ones you mentioned, Pakistan, Kashmir, India. Can you imagine what would happen if you could do away with all the nuclear energy out there, and that foreign aid went to solar panel, wind farms and everything else? It'd make a massive difference to those countries. Locally, I mean, it's a very worrying world when you've got someone like Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement.
Yeah.
That is scary for anyone that's interested in climate change, because he's like the most powerful man in the world saying, well, really, I'm not too bothered about it. I'm more interested in the coal industry in my country than I am in climate change. Locally, we can only affect the local stuff.
Yeah.
But that's just as important. If every council in the country decided to go for carbon neutral by 2040, that would be a massive step forward.
Right. Let's just hang on there, Tom. Right. Carbon zero by 2040. What
carbon neutral.
Carbon neutral. What does that mean?
What it means is for all the good stuff, all the bad stuff you put in the atmosphere, there's good stuff going into the atmosphere as well. So it balances itself out. Right. It's like electric vehicles. The council's looking now at changing all its own fleet to an electric fleet. Costs an absolute bucket loads of money, so we're looking for a cheaper way to do it. The airport, a lot of councils up and down the country excluded the airport from their climate change reports. Manchester, Liverpool just excluded. Luton, we thought, well, we can't really do that. The airport needs to be part of that. We say about jobs, if the airport gets an extension, another 7,000 jobs up there. We need to make sure those jobs are clean jobs and green jobs up there.
Right.
One of the big ones, what affects you, going back to an old argument we've had on this station before, what affects you, your own personal self, is recycling.
Yeah.
Because even though we've gone to fortnightly bin collections, we're still taking 60,000 tonnes of rubbish a year to the tip or to the incinerator. If you can cut that down, it's not only good for the atmosphere, but what it does, it means Luton be able to spend the money, instead of paying £96 a tonne for burying stuff in the ground, it'll be able to spend the money on other services, and that would be a massive step forward for us. But it's one of the things we're looking at is, and I'll be quite open and honest with you, is town centre businesses get charged for having for their employees driving into the town.
Right.
All the money from that, what we're looking for is to invest in a Luton Council bus service on the routes we want it to go on, on electric vehicles, instead of all the money going into it on the routes Arriva want, and all the profit going off to Arriva shareholders. By doing it that way, we can do our own little bit in Luton. If everyone else does it, it'd be brilliant. But a lot of these councils up and down the country, and I've been spending a lot of time reading their reports, have declared a climate change emergency and then thrown the report in the bin, which is going to do no one any good at all.
Right, Tom, very quickly, I've got Kamran Shahzad on the phone. I want to take him for a couple of minutes before we go into the commercial break in about 5 minutes time, but I just want to give you the last minute or so. Any other practical steps that our local residents in Luton or any of the other towns that are listening today can take to help within climate?
If you're living in a low poverty household where you're renting, get your landlord to have a look and see if there's any insulation grants available, so you can get your house insulated up to a level what would help with climate change. If you're still using coal for your fire, get your landlord to see if there's any other forms of heating what they're prepared to put in. The council itself is going to take one big step and actually change the local plan. And by changing the local plan, upping the insulation levels and everything else, that'll help all new properties. But what we've got to look for, one of the big, and it's a report I'll announce it here, it's going to be announced on Monday in Luton. And it's called private sector licensing, where every rented private sector property in the town is going to have to be registered with the council. And part of that, and you say it's officially it'll be launched on Monday, part of that will be that you will insulate your houses properly and everything else to stop the greenhouse gases escaping from the property.
Tom Shaw, on that note, Councillor Tom Shaw, thank you very much for joining us here in the studio this evening. I know you have to go anyway, so I'm going to let you go a couple of minutes early because I need to go to Kamran Shahzad, who's been very patiently waiting for me for the last couple of minutes. Thank you very much, Tom, for joining us this evening. Kamran Shahzad, Jazakallah for your patience. Again, I've got a bio here, sustainability lead for the Bahu Trust and climate change advisor to some of the organisations. Very passionate about the environment and the climate change, and I understand you've been involved with quite a few projects. Potentially, I think, were you involved in the latest project in Cambridge, Masjid 2 also?
No.
Oh, you wasn't?
That's got nothing to do with me. No.
All right, fine. Right, Kamran, tell us your background and how you've got involved into this area.
Okay, first of all, to all the listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And you've actually been patient with me because I should have been here earlier. My own professional background in international development. For almost 20 years now, I've been doing charity work with a Muslim NGO. And it was when I was working there in the field, especially in East Africa, I came across this, where I came to realize quite quickly that all the work we do with poor people, everything really is revolved around the environment. So you can do as many interventions or as much work as you like, but if you're not protecting their natural resources, you're not really successful. And I'll just give you an example. We'd spend hundreds and thousands of pounds building water wells, only for them to dry out in a couple of years' time. And there was one particular region where we then did some research, looked into why they were drying out, and then and it's because there was mass deforestation taking place not far away. And so then you come to think, actually, we need a forest management system to safeguard the water in the first place. So that's where my whole journey about environmentalism and everything started. And then also when I was talking to the local villages, they were talking to me about from an Islamic perspective.
Okay, Kamran Sahib, we're gonna hopefully you're gonna hold on, and we're gonna come back to you because we're gonna go into a mandatory commercial break. Are you all right to hold for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, go for it.
Fantastic. All right, so I'm sorry, but we have to go into this commercial break, right? So we'll be back in a couple of minutes, inshallah. We're gonna put you on hold, but listeners, that we've got Kamran Shahzad, who's the sustainability lead for the Bahu Trust. We've got sisters Halima and Zanira here in the studio, and we are discussing environment climate special for 1 hour this evening. When we come back in a couple of minutes, I want to start looking at our local attitudes, our household attitudes, our individual attitudes. Are we beginning to take this subject matter seriously? That's what we're going to be discussing when we come back. Don't go away. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Until then, assalamu alaikum.
You're listening to an Inspire FM podcast, making available our popular programs from our daily broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Friday Night Live with me, Hafiz Sha'ban, on this Friday the 31st of January evening. We've just gone past 7:30 p.m. and we have now gone into the last half an hour of the show this evening. 01582 481822 is the number here in the studio. I want to hear from my listeners. 01582481822. We're discussing a very interesting topic, and the sisters I've got in the studio, I've got some interesting observations and comments that we're going to be discussing in the next half an hour. I definitely want to hear from some of you guys. Right? I want to know what your attitudes and what your thoughts are with regards to our current practices when it comes to climate and environment versus what our parents used to do. Maybe subconsciously or maybe just materialistically, they wanted to save that extra pound or penny. But you know what? It also had a lot of benefits when it came to the climate and the environment. And we've got a very disposable attitude and mentality today when it comes to the younger generation, right? At least that's what I've observed. 01582481822 is the number here in the studio. 07779 481-822. Where are you texters and your WhatsApp, those of you that love your WhatsApp messages? Speaking of which, we have got another message from brother Hamza Atiq. Okay, great points by everyone. I was just about to ask what we can do as a community, but Tom earlier literally hit the nail on the head. Fair enough. Alright, fantastic. Alright, so let's go straight into the conversation, and let's go straight to Kamran, and let's go straight to Halima, and let's go straight to Zanira, right? So I want to bring this conversation from this global and international dimensions right through to the local. We've looked at what the implications are internationally, globally. We've looked at realistic, right? Something that is close to all of a lot of our listeners, which is Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and how climate change has a direct proportional impact to those lands. Africa, East Africa, a lot of us are from those areas of the world, right? And we know the major culprits are the governments and the corporates, and we've had that conversation to some extent in the first half an hour. I want to bring it to now at a local level, right? What do we do as individuals? How do we change our attitudes? How do we change our practices? Are we changing attitudes? Are we changing practices? I mean, for example, I've seen that the massages are becoming a lot more conscious in terms of water wastage, and even some of the a lot of them used to use tissues, and they've stopped using tissues. They've gone for other solutions which are a lot more environment kind of climate friendly. I'm sure some of those massages are looking at it from an economic perspective, not from an environment climate perspective. But those are the kind of questions, right, that I want you to look at. Let's start delving into some specifics, shall we? Right? Where should we start from? Shall we start from you, Halima? I think you've been a patient the longest. Let's go with you, Halima.
Yes, it's something that you mentioned about kind of what our parents did in their generation. Yeah. And I know a lot of people, sort of youngsters, would laugh at it when we were young. Yeah. It was things like plastic boxes or plastic dabbe. Yeah. Having, we are used to sort of going to the freezer and seeing like an ice cream box, but inside it is curries frozen, and those sort of chocolate boxes with like, I don't know, bits and bobs inside them, and although we laughed at it back in the day, that is something, that kind of mentality is something that we need to kind of go back to, and not dispose of everything.
But is that just not fashionable? I mean, today, I am actually tired of the amount of and this is all about the corporate consumer culture, where you've got bags for everything, bags for sandwiches, bags for this, bags for that, and we've almost now gone into a culture of disposable this, disposable that, and everything is disposable, right? Which obviously then means we're using more natural resources, right? And and that seems to be the trend in a lot of our households, right? So is that a bit old-fashioned for us to go back to the tiffins?
I think that's what kind of we need to do. We need to go back to that to be able to actually start reusing stuff as opposed to just using it once and just throwing it away. Yeah. Even when it comes to fashion, I know we mentioned it slightly, but this whole fast fashion industry, it's a booming industry. But if you think about it, you're wearing a certain item of clothing, you think it's out of fashion, and then people end up throwing it away. Yeah. They should be recycling it, going into giving them to charity shops, or just stop buying like that many in the first place.
Yeah. All right, Zanira, I don't know if you're going to understand this, but do you know what a taki is?
I feel like I've heard of it before. What is a taki?
Exactly. Some of my listeners will understand that, right? So back in the days, you just had a cloth, right, which you used for cleaning, and nowadays you got a wipe, which is for the floor, a wipe which is for the tops, a wipe which is for specifically for this.
Do you mean kapra?
Taki kapra. Yeah, exactly, right? So, it was that recyclable attitude of using a kapra or a taki, right? And now you've got a wipe for every single item in the household, which is completely different. again, that corporate consumer culture, which is driven, you go and buy this and go and buy that. Those are the kind of attitudes. What are some of the examples that you want to share with our listeners?
So you mentioned at the start of the show about like how there was plastic for everything and now we don't have any of it. Let me just kind of like break that down and put it into perspective. So plastic is comes from crude oil, right? There's a whole process to create a product of plastic, right? You extract minerals, you create something from it, it goes into production, there's people involved. And then if it's a plastic bottle or if it's a plastic wrapper on your sandwich, for example, you use it once and then you chuck it away. Now, the thing with plastic is that it's going to be around way, way, way longer than we are. So plastic, because it's like changed and it's become this new material, it doesn't actually break down, it doesn't decompose, it's not biodegradable. So essentially all it does is break down into tiny pieces, ends up in our water supply, ends up in our oceans, which we're probably seeing around, the plastic ocean, David Attenborough documentaries, etc. But also I think there's like research to show that even babies being born like have some sort of like levels of plastic in them, because it turns into such tiny pieces that the human eye can't see, ends up in our water supply and we drink that. So we've destroyed the earth so much that plastic is everywhere and plastic never fully goes away. Now, we spoke a bit about recycling. I just want to kind of say, like, recycling is not the answer. It's one step towards this culture of waste that we live in. So recycling something, so if I'm recycling a bottle, it's not going to turn into the exact same product that it was before. Actually, every time you recycle, it loses quality and it goes down in quality. So you can only really recycle something 2 or 3 times, or maybe 4 times, before it has to go into waste anyway. So the answer is not to keep using the same amount of plastic and then recycling it and feeling like it's all okay, because actually what we need to do is look at how much plastic we're using, cut down, or we don't even need it. I mean, for example, masjids, you mentioned masjids, right? They fundraise, and in Ramadan, like, everyone will get a water bottle. Now, you're really using that bottle like maximum an hour if you're going to drink it slowly. That will go, and that will take 500 years to biodegrade. So a tip on that, actually, why don't we look at it differently? Instead of buying, water, yes, it's charity, we can give it, we can get reward from it, but will we actually be getting reward if it's going into waste? So my tip on that, let me just kind of tell you. So my tip on that for masjids is, if you're going to fundraise, you want to give out water, why don't you fundraise and install a water fountain in your masjid, right? And you encourage people to either bring a bottle or give cups, and that way you're actually cutting down the culture of waste, of like single use, and it's more Islamic if you think about it. We're reusing cutlery, we're using things. We can look at it differently. Like, we don't want easy, simple fixes. We want things that make sense, that are not going to harm the environment in the long term.
All right. I really appreciate that. But I've got 2 guests on the phones, very, very patient. Kamran's been almost waiting now for 10 minutes. So Kamran, really apologise for your wait, Kamran Shahzad Sahab. But let's come back to you, Kamran. Tell us more about your work and how you're promoting the environment and the kind of climate awareness with some of the institutions that you're working with, Kamran.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say ditto to what the sister said earlier, because I think she hit the nail on the head. Right. That recycling isn't the way forward. Reducing and reusing is the way forward.
Reducing and reusing.
Yeah, because recycle just gives an excuse to buy more things. And it costs to recycle, while reducing and reusing is a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right. He led a very simplistic life. Right. And I just want to add to that, that one of the key things that we need to do is we need to change our own mindset. And I want to give an example of last year, just before Ramadan. Right. I saw a meme of, you all know what a meme is. Yeah. And it was in Ramadan. So it's a caption. It was a picture of some Ramadan sales, like a month before Ramadan in Asda, and the caption read, "When capitalism is more prepared for Ramadan than you are." And it's so true. They know that we're going to target your mentality and we're going to get you to buy a whole load of things before Ramadan because we've lost our connection with the earth.
Yes.
And I suppose that now leads to...
I was going to say, Kamran, we've lost our connection with humanity, never mind Earth, right? I mean, I'm sure some of my listeners are going to be thinking of, humanity comes first and we've kind of become desensitized to what's happening with human beings, never mind the Earth, right?
But you're right. I mean, a big part of what I do is I'm not a big fan of telling people what to do and what not to do.
Right. What's your philosophy then, Kamran?
My philosophy is tap into your values, make the connection between the earth and the Quran and the Prophet, peace be upon him. And all this eco stuff and environmental stuff and eco-mosque, this is not new. I mean, we're arrogant when we think we're being eco. If you look at the way things were 100 years ago, everything was naturally eco.
Yes.
Now when we do things... So
I think it's a very good point.
Yeah, when so part of what I'm trying to do is relate, because I guarantee you, I challenge you, open any page in the Quran and there will be a reference to nature.
The creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I totally agree. Kamran, just let me pause you for a moment and let me go to my other guest who's equally been as patient, and I'm going to try to get the name correct first time. Kat for short, that will help me a lot. Team Manager, Sustainable Development and Transport. Thank you very much for joining us, Kat, this evening.
Hello.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to listen in the conversation.
Sorry. I'm sure it's a pleasure, but also thank you very much for your patience. Kat, tell us more about your work and your involvement in this environment and climate kind of sphere, and how you fit into this discussion.
So I've worked for Luton Borough Council for the last 11 years.
Right.
I've been involved in a number of environmental projects. I started off as climate change officer, and I've got a privilege to manage a number of very dedicated teams now dealing with sustainable drainage, flood risk, sustainable transport, and I'm the council operational lead on climate change.
Wow.
So,
okay, big portfolio there, Kat. Give us some practical tips for our listeners. I mean, we've discussed a lot about the theory, we've discussed a lot about the concepts. Let's talk about some practicalities. We've got about 10 minutes left, right? So I want our listeners to go away with a very clear set of actions, a clear kind of attitudes that they can change, changes that they can bring into their lives. That would help, and especially what I like this phrases from Kamran about reducing, reusing. Probably some of the sisters here in the studio that have used that your phrase, something that can resonates around that messaging.
I definitely agree with the reducing and reusing and respecting your resource. Because this is what the national experts are advising as well.
Right.
So reducing resource and especially food waste is very important.
Right.
The messages that are coming from the national experts are also saying about swapping animal-based foods for vegetable-based foods. If everyone would do it one day a week, it would be an equivalent of planting 50 million trees.
Wow. What's that practically? What does that mean, Kat?
So swap a meat. Meat-based.
Okay.
Yes, the meat-based meal, like your beef, lamb, dairy, for a vegetable meal.
So your message is almost for me, because I'm a big meat fan. So what you're saying is stop eating too much meat and introduce more vegetables in your diet.
Exactly,
which is good for my health, and you're telling me
as well.
Exactly. So it's good for my health and it's good for my wealth because it's a lot cheaper, and it's good for the environment, is what you're telling me. And the climate.
Exactly, precisely so.
Okay.
And another hugely important aspect that councillors have also touched upon is public transport, sustainable transport, because the
public transport, right? So encouraging our listeners more towards public transport, more towards walking. You know what? Again, something
cycling. Yes,
cycling. Okay, I like that. I like that. Yeah.
Also, lift sharing with your friends, family, or co-workers. because that is good for the social fabric as well.
I think lift sharing is a good idea. I think my neighbours might get annoyed if I keep asking them for lifts, but I like that as a suggestion. Once a week, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Take it
once a fortnight. Start small and then develop.
Yeah, it's like when you go for Salah, for example, you go for Zuhr, I'm going, my neighbour's going, the other guy's going down the road, and we're all taking our own cars. Why don't we jump into the same car and go for Salah and then come back?
Carpooling.
Yeah, carpooling, right? So I like that as an idea. Come on, Saab, go on, come on.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. There's a hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that says the person that walks the furthest to the mosque is the one that's rewarded the most.
I thought you were going to say that, Kamran, right? You want me to walk, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, good. I want to keep this flow of ideas coming because I've got a very lengthy message that's come through from Mrs. Begum. I'm going to try to read that. All right, continue, Kat. Let's continue with some of these fantastic ideas.
My other message would be there is a number of emissions or impact that we will have on the planet.
Right.
So just to counter that, plant a tree. Just don't or gift someone a tree plant. Don't give them more stuff. Don't buy them more toys that are probably unnecessary.
So buy them what? A tree plant?
Trees, plants. Gift a plant.
Gift a plant.
Yeah,
that's a very good idea. I like that idea actually.
There are charities out there. Charities out there who will plant trees for you if you don't have the place.
Yeah, I mean, you know what, Kat, I've just got a very interesting comment that's come through. I want to read it. It's a bit lengthy, but let me just read it because she says, Assalamu alaikum. I'm really glad to hear the show addressing climate change issues. Right, it's high time that we as a community stepped up, played our part in conserving the planet and its resources for our children and grandchildren, inshallah. Can you link the topic to our Islamic values of avoiding excess, right? So, Kamran, something for you to think about, right? Can we link our discussion to Islamic values of avoiding excess, in this case through waste? Avoiding extravagance is mentioned in the Quran and in various hadiths. Waste, especially food, is discouraged. I think remembering that it should be part of our characters as Muslims to avoid waste and use resources in a mindful and responsible way. Jazakallah khair, Mrs. Begum. Fantastic. Very nice message there. Kamran Saab, did you hear that?
Yes, I did, and he's hit the nail on the head. There are plenty. I mean, there's you would know better than me. Wakulu washrabu wala tufsiru innahu la yuhibbul mufsirin. So eat and drink, but do not waste. For Allah does not like the wasters.
Yes.
Also in Surah Rahman says, "Fabi ayyi ala'i rabbikuma tukazziman."
Yes.
You know, which of the blessings of Allah will you deny? So Allah is not telling us. Allah is saying, "I've given you everything to enjoy."
Yeah.
But in the same surah, Allah talks about the balance.
Yeah.
That what you take with one hand, you give back with the other.
Yeah.
Don't keep taking.
Yeah.
So that balance, the mizan, is a huge part, which, the sustainability.
Yes.
So Allah is very clear about extravagant and wasters.
Right.
And we don't even realize we are producing and creating things just to throw away.
Yes.
Without even realizing.
Yes.
You mentioned this earlier. I heard you mention that.
Yes, no, I really appreciate that. Okay, Kamran Shahzad Sahab, Jazakallah, thank you very much for joining us this evening on the Friday Night Live. Unfortunately, we are running out of time.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you early, and thank you very much for your time this evening, Kamran Shahzad. Thank you very much. Kat, any final thoughts and suggestions to our listeners before?
Heating your house is hugely important and has a very high impact on the carbon footprint. To get the heating control right. I know they're sometimes complicated and we don't pay attention. So maybe dropping the temperature by a couple of degrees would be acceptable. Checking
perhaps wear warmer clothes. Perhaps wear warmer clothes at home so you don't need to keep the heating on all the time too. Perhaps.
Exactly.
I'm a bit guilty of that. I have to admit. Yeah.
Some of the energy company offers would offer support for lower income households to put extra insulation. Loft insulation is the most cost effective and got greatest results. Cavity wall insulation offers are also available. Saving water. hot water especially.
Right.
Huge impact on your carbon footprint again.
Okay.
And on your energy bills too.
All right, fantastic. Kat, thank you. On that note, thank you very much. We've just got the last couple of minutes left for the guests in the studio, but really appreciate your time this evening. Have a lovely weekend and a lovely evening.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kat. Okay, that was Kat joining us, and she was the Team Manager Sustainable Development and Transport on behalf of Luton Council. Right, I want to come straight to my guests here in the studio. Again, you've been very patient listening to our guests on the phone. We've got about 5 minutes left. Right, so we need to wrap all of that up in the next 5 minutes with a clear, succinct message. Halima, let's go to you.
Yes, I've got two kind of clear points I want to kind of raise.
All right,
so one of them is about the Islamic concept of stewardship.
Yeah.
And this I understand is a Christian concept as well.
Yeah.
To actually kind of, the whole kind of eco-environmental things that we're kind of talking about.
So Islamic stewardship is just for our listeners, that we are representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accountable, responsible individuals, and we have a responsibility, right? So that's what we're saying. Okay.
And I think a place that has done that really well is Cambridge Mosque. Sorry.
Okay.
And so they've actually have got Europe's first eco mosque, as it's kind of been termed. So they've done initiatives such as sort of capturing the rainwater to kind of reuse that, sort of like when we're doing wudu and so on. They've even got like an energy efficiency room. So I think little things like that, if mosques can start implementing. And the other thing is, instead of just reducing and reusing, we need to have prevention and investment as well.
So you've just introduced prevention and investment.
And I think one of the key things is, so for example, we mentioned about food wastage. If we have food sort of compost bins, if we invest in that, like it could be community ones, it could be one per street, or however people want to implement this. That's one step. And then the other one is about transport. And I think it's a really unfair statement to kind of, when people are sort of pushing about public transport, when public transport isn't feasible. So at the moment, we have a very, very poor public transport system. The buses are not very regular. And telling people to walk, there's a lot of people who've got mobility or disability issues. So walking for them isn't always an option. There's places in Luton.
Car sharing.
So car sharing, but also when it comes to public transport, it needs to be made better. We need investment in that.
Exactly.
At the moment, you look at different wards in Luton where the buses don't run after like 7 p.m. or the buses don't run on Sundays. I've got friends who say they can't come out on a certain day because there's no buses that run. So the amount of people spending money on taxis just because there's no other alternative. It's actually cheaper for some parts in Luton to actually take taxis than it is to actually get buses.
Two buses or whatever.
There's been places where I've had to travel for about 2 hours just to get from one end to another end in Luton.
Right. I think that was a good point that we should have mentioned to the council representatives about better public transport. But Halima, you've mentioned some fantastic points. It would be really interesting to get massages, and their input, because when it comes to Ramadan, when it comes to iftar time, when it comes to a lot of the other functions, we again, a lot of plastic being used. Back in the days, it used to be one tray, and people would eat together collectively from that tray. It built the spirit of brotherhood. It also allowed less wastage, and it also ensured that all of this recycling business, it doesn't have to happen.
Unites people,
but the trend has gone in the opposite direction. Right, we've got 2 minutes left, and I want to bring in Zanera before we end the show, and I've got a comment that's coming to Zanera.
I think a lot of things we mentioned, it's not an easy. I think we should forget that it's going to be easy. We actually need to really look at within ourselves, and we're going to have to change our lifestyles. Like, we need to stop going for convenience and actually put that extra effort in to keep the world in balance, like we're warned to do. And if not, like in the Quran, like if not, we know there'll be destruction. So simple things like not buying plastic bottles. Of course, sometimes we make mistakes. That's fine. Just invest in a reusable one. Invest in a reusable coffee cup. Like, people have a coffee every day. Some people on the go. Like, if you invest in a reusable one, think about in a year how much are you saving, right? And that's just one person. If we all do it, it's great. Also, coffee cups aren't actually recyclable because they have like a plastic film inside. So where some things we think are recyclable, they're not. Things like I mentioned, like if we're fundraising, if we want to give charity for water, let's stop thinking about plastic. Let's try and think about reusable alternatives, or let's start thinking about other materials that aren't as destructive. car sharing, like
5
we mentioned.
seconds.
I also want to say, so most people that are affected by sort of air pollution are the youngest people in society, so that are kids because of the fumes. So actually, most people drive for a journey they could actually be walking in. So stop driving as much and start taking public transport where you can and start walking.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Halima and Zanira. I mean, I've got very late messages. Taj, Assalam, I am affiliated with Masjid Bilal and would be quite interested in more information about the Eco Masjid ideas. All right, get in touch. Hamza Atik also sending in messages very late now about, it costing a lot more money, needs to be affordable, etc. But unfortunately, we have run out of time, and it was fantastic conversation that we've had on the environment and the climate change, especially over the last hour. Do tune in and listen to the show, and anyone who wants further ideas and further suggestions, then please get in touch with the radio and we will put you in touch with the experts. Fantastic. Humera, Halima, thank you very much for joining us in the studio. It's been fantastic. And listeners, thank you very much for contributing in today's discussion, tonight's show. It's been really, really good to get your contributions and your thoughts and your opinions. And unfortunately, until next week, it is Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh from all of us here in the studio.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Why not tune in to our live stream at inspirefm.org and follow and subscribe to our social media platforms at Inspire FM Luton.